What happens when a 19-year-old girl walks into the most elite military training facility in America and asked to try the sniper course that breaks seasoned warriors? Most would expect laughter, dismissal, maybe even anger from the hardened instructors. But sometimes the most explosive moments in history begin with someone saying no to the wrong person. This is the true story of how one colonel's brush-off became the catalyst for rewriting every record book in military sniper history, and how a young woman's finger on a trigger would forever change what America believed about who could be their deadliest protector. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Quantico training grounds as Colonel James Mitchell stepped out of his black government sedan. At 52, Mitchell had seen enough in his military career to think he'd encountered every type of recruit, every kind of surprise, and every possible outcome. His weathered face bore the marks of 2 decades spent training America's most elite warriors, and his reputation for turning ordinary soldiers into extraordinary snipers was legendary throughout the Marine Corps. Mitchell's boots crunched against the gravel as he walked toward the sniper training facility, reviewing the day's schedule in his mind. Today would be like any other, pushing his current class of Navy SEALs to their absolute limits, separating those who had what it took from those who would wash out. The sniper program had a 92% failure rate, and Mitchell took pride in maintaining those standards. In his world, second place meant someone died, and he wasn't about to lower his standards for anyone. The facility itself was an imposing structure of concrete and steel, surrounded by ranges that stretched for miles into the Virginia wilderness. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of graduates who had gone on to serve with distinction in every major conflict of the past 20 years. Their faces told stories of precision, dedication, and the kind of mental fortitude that couldn't be taught, only discovered under pressure. As Mitchell entered the main building, he was greeted by Master Sergeant Rodriguez, his second-in-command, and a man whose own shooting abilities were the stuff of military legend. Rodriguez had been with the program for 8 years, and together he and Mitchell had refined the training protocols to create what many considered the most challenging sniper course in the world. "Morning, Colonel," Rodriguez said, falling into step beside his commanding officer. "We've got 18 candidates starting the advanced marksmanship phase today. 3 Marines, 12 Navy SEALs, 2 Army Rangers, and 1 Air Force Special Operations." Mitchell nodded, scanning the list Rodriguez handed him. These were already elite soldiers, men who had survived multiple screening processes just to earn a spot in the program. They were the best of the best, and even among them, most would fail to meet the exacting standards required to become a certified military sniper. "Any concerns?" Mitchell asked, his eyes moving down the roster. "Nothing unusual, sir. Standard mix of experience levels, though we got a few who think their previous combat experience means they can skip the fundamentals." This was a common problem. Combat veterans often arrived at sniper school believing their battlefield experience would carry them through the technical aspects of long-range precision shooting. They usually learned quickly that hitting a target at 800 meters while lying comfortably on a shooting mat was entirely different from making split-second shots under enemy fire. The 2 men made their way to the observation deck that overlooked the primary training range. Below them, the day's candidates were already assembling, checking their gear, and engaging in the nervous banter that typically preceded high-stakes training. Mitchell could read the group's dynamics from his elevated position. The natural leaders, the quiet ones who would surprise everyone, and the ones who were already psyching themselves out. At exactly 0800 hours, the candidates formed up for their morning briefing. Mitchell was about to head down to address them when Rodriguez touched his arm. "Sir, we've got a situation at the front gate." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "What kind of situation?" "There's a civilian requesting access to the facility. Young woman, maybe 19 or 20, says she wants to try the sniper course." For a moment, Mitchell thought Rodriguez was joking. Then he saw the serious expression on his second-in-command's face and realized this was real. "A civilian? How did she even get to the front gate?" "Drove herself, sir. Security says she's been polite but persistent. Won't leave until she speaks with someone in charge." Mitchell felt a familiar irritation building. The sniper program was constantly dealing with wannabes, military enthusiasts, and people who had watched too many movies and thought they understood what precision shooting involved. The fact that this particular individual was a teenage girl only made the situation more absurd. Handle it, Rodriguez. Tell her this is a military installation and that civilian access is not permitted. Already tried that, sir. She says she understands the protocols, but believes there might be exceptions for exceptional circumstances. Exceptional circumstances? Mitchell's voice carried the edge that his subordinates had learned to recognize as a warning. What exactly does she think is exceptional about her circumstances? Rodriguez consulted his notepad. She claims she's been shooting competitively since she was 12 and has some records that might be of interest to the military. Mitchell almost laughed. Competitive shooting was a world apart from military sniping. The differences in environment, pressure, equipment, and stakes made civilian shooting sport about as relevant to military sniping as go-kart racing was to Formula One driving. Rodriguez, I've got 18 elite warriors down there who've earned their right to be here through years of service and sacrifice. I'm not going to waste training time or ammunition on some kid who thinks her county fair shooting prizes qualify her for military sniper school. Understood, sir. I'll have security escort her off the premises. Mitchell was already turning back toward the range when something made him pause. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the sheer audacity of the request, but he found himself reconsidering. In his 20 years of training snipers, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people, and something about this situation nagged at him. What did you say her name was? Rodriguez checked his notes again. Sarah Chun, age 19, from California. Security ran her license. Clean record, no flags. Chun, Mitchell repeated, the name triggering a distant memory. Sarah Chun, that name sounds familiar. He pulled out his smartphone and ran a quick search. What he found made him stop in his tracks. Sarah Chun wasn't just any competitive shooter. She was the youngest person ever to win the National Rifle Association's High Power Championship, a feat she'd accomplished at age 16. She held junior records in multiple shooting disciplines and had been featured in several shooting sports magazines as a rising star in precision rifle competition. But what really caught Mitchell's attention was a small article from a military publication about civilian shooting records that might be of interest to military recruiters. According to the piece, Sarah Chun had achieved groups that, if verified under military conditions, would represent some of the most accurate shooting ever recorded. Colonel Rodriguez was watching him with curiosity. Mitchell looked down at the range where his carefully selected candidates were beginning their first exercise of the day. These were proven warriors, each of them already operating at the top of their respective fields. The idea that a teenage civilian could contribute anything meaningful to their training seemed ridiculous. And yet, bring her in, Mitchell said suddenly. Sir, escort Miss Chun to observation deck B. I want to speak with her personally. Rodriguez looked surprised, but nodded. Yes, sir. Should I delay the morning exercises? No. Proceed with the scheduled training. This won't take long. As Rodriguez left to collect the unexpected visitor, Mitchell found himself wondering what he was doing. His training schedule was precisely calibrated, his standards were non-negotiable, and his time was valuable. The rational thing to do was exactly what he'd initially planned: have security remove the girl and continue with his real job of training military snipers. But 20 years of working with exceptional people had taught him that true excellence often came from unexpected places. The best snipers he'd trained hadn't always been the ones with the most obvious qualifications. Some of his most successful graduates had been quiet individuals who initially seemed unremarkable, but possessed that indefinable combination of mental discipline, physical ability, and competitive drive that separated good shooters from great ones. 15 minutes later, Rodriguez returned with Sarah Chun, and Mitchell got his first look at the young woman who had somehow talked her way onto one of America's most secure military installations. She was smaller than he'd expected, probably 5 feet 4 inches, and maybe 120 pounds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans, hiking boots, and a plain blue t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance suggested military training or elite athletic ability. She looked like any college student who might be visiting the area for tourism. But her eyes were different. As she stepped onto the observation deck and looked out over the training range, Mitchell saw something he recognized, the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what they were observing. Her gaze moved systematically across the range setup, taking in the target positions, wind flags, and shooting positions with the analytical approach of an experienced shooter. "Miss Chun," Mitchell said, his tone carefully neutral, "I understand you're interested in our training program." Sarah turned to face him, and he was struck by her directness. There was no nervousness, no starstruck awe at being inside a military facility, just calm attention. "Colonel Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is unusual, and I appreciate you taking the time." Her voice was steady, confident without being arrogant. Mitchell had interviewed thousands of potential snipers over the years, and he developed a sense for reading people quickly. Sarah Chun didn't fit any category he was familiar with. "I'll be direct, Miss Chun. This facility trains military snipers for combat operations. We're not a civilian shooting club, and we don't offer recreational programs. What exactly do you think we can do for you?" Sarah nodded, as if she'd expected this question. "I understand the difference between competitive shooting and military sniping, Colonel. I'm not here because I think my competition experience qualifies me for military service. I'm here because I believe I might be able to contribute something to your training program." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Contribute something? You're 19 years old with no military experience. What could you possibly contribute to training Navy SEALs?" "A perspective that might be valuable," Sarah replied calmly. "I've been studying precision shooting since I was 12. Not just practicing it, but studying it: ballistics, wind reading, equipment optimization, mental techniques. I've worked with some of the best civilian coaches in the country, and I've learned approaches that might not be standard in military training, such as—" Sarah gestured toward the range below, where the candidates were setting up for their first shooting exercise. "For example, I can see from here that your wind flags are positioned at standard intervals, but the terrain creates microclimates that those flags won't accurately represent. A shooter using only those references would miss the wind conditions affecting the mid-range trajectory." Mitchell followed her gaze and realized she was right. The particular geography of this range did create wind patterns that their current flag system didn't fully capture. It was a subtle observation that even experienced military shooters sometimes missed. "That's observant," he admitted grudgingly. "I'm not trying to prove I'm better than your trainees, Colonel. I'm suggesting that sometimes an outside perspective can identify things that people inside the system might overlook simply because they're too familiar with standard procedures." Mitchell considered this. Military training was necessarily standardized, which meant it could sometimes become rigid. Innovation often came from questioning established methods, and Sarah was suggesting she might offer exactly that kind of fresh perspective. "Let's say, hypothetically, that I was interested in this outside perspective. What would you be proposing?" "A demonstration," Sarah said immediately. "Give me access to your range for one afternoon. Let me show you some of the techniques I've developed. If they're not useful, I'll leave and never bother you again. If they're useful, maybe we can discuss how they might be incorporated into your training program." It was a reasonable proposal, but Mitchell still hesitated. His program operated under strict protocols, and allowing a civilian onto an active military training range would require approvals he wasn't sure he could get. "Miss Chun, even if I wanted to arrange something like this, there are regulations, security clearances, liability issues." "I've already been background checked for today's visit," Sarah interrupted gently. "And I'm willing to sign whatever liability waivers are necessary. As for regulations, I researched the relevant policies before coming here. There are provisions for civilian technical consultants to participate in training exercises under certain circumstances." Mitchell stared at her. "You researched military regulations?" "When I decide I want something, Colonel, I tend to be thorough." For the first time since this conversation had started, Mitchell felt a genuine spark of interest. The combination of technical knowledge, preparation, and quiet confidence reminded him of the qualities he looked for in his best students. Down on the range, the morning's first shooting exercise was beginning. Mitchell watched his carefully selected candidates take their positions, knowing that by the end of the day, several of them would have been eliminated from the program. The standards were unforgiving because the job they were training for allowed no margin for error. One afternoon, he said finally, This afternoon, after regular training concludes, you'll have access to one range, standard military ammunition, and 2 hours to demonstrate whatever techniques you think might be valuable. Master Sergeant Rodriguez will observe and evaluate. If he's impressed, we'll talk further. If not, this conversation never happened. Sarah's face lit up with the first real smile Mitchell had seen from her. That's all I'm asking for, Colonel. Thank you. As she left with Rodriguez to complete the necessary paperwork, Mitchell found himself wondering what he'd just committed to. In his experience, civilian shooters who claimed to have revolutionary techniques usually demonstrated nothing more than expensive equipment and theoretical knowledge that fell apart under real-world conditions. But something about Sarah Chun suggested she might be different. Her confidence wasn't the brittle arrogance he'd seen in other civilians who overestimated their abilities. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had been tested and knew exactly what they were capable of. Mitchell returned his attention to the ongoing training exercise, but found his focus divided. Part of him was already curious about what the afternoon might bring, while another part warned him that he was making a mistake that would waste time and potentially compromise his program's reputation. By noon, word had spread among the training staff that a civilian would be using the range that afternoon. The reactions ranged from curiosity to skepticism to outright disbelief that Colonel Mitchell had agreed to such an arrangement. Master Sergeant Rodriguez fielded dozens of questions about the mysterious visitor who had somehow convinced their notoriously strict commander to bend the rules. She must be somebody's daughter, suggested Gunnery Sergeant Williams, one of the instructors. Military contractor, maybe, or politician. Nah, disagreed Sergeant First Class Thompson. If it was about politics or connections, the colonel would have gone through the motions but made sure she failed. This feels different. Rodriguez kept his opinions to himself, but privately, he was as curious as everyone else. In 8 years of working with Colonel Mitchell, he'd never seen him deviate from protocol for a civilian. The fact that he was willing to do so for a 19-year-old girl suggested that Sarah Chun had made an impression that went beyond her unexpected request. As the afternoon approached, Mitchell found himself making excuses to walk past the range where Sarah would be conducting her demonstration. He told himself he was simply ensuring that everything was properly set up, but the truth was that he was increasingly curious about what she planned to show them. At 1,500 hours, Sarah arrived at the designated range carrying a single rifle case and a small equipment bag. She was accompanied by Rodriguez, who had spent the lunch hour reviewing her competition records and was clearly intrigued by what he'd found. Colonel, Rodriguez reported as they approached, Miss Chin's equipment is civilian grade, but high quality. Her rifle is a custom precision build that would be competitive with our military systems. She's requested permission to use our standard ammunition rather than her own loads. This surprised Mitchell. Most civilian precision shooters were obsessive about their ammunition, often hand-loading cartridges to specific tolerances. The fact that Sarah was willing to use military ammunition suggested either supreme confidence or supreme foolishness. Very well, Mitchell said. Miss Chun, you have a range. Show us what you think we need to see. What happened next would forever change how the United States military thought about precision shooting, human potential, and the assumptions they made about who could serve as their most elite warriors. But as Sarah Chin opened her rifle case and began her preparation routine, Colonel Mitchell had no idea that he was about to witness the beginning of a revolution that would reshape military sniper training for decades to come. Sarah Chin's rifle case clicked open with military precision, revealing a weapon that immediately caught the attention of everyone present. The custom rifle was built on a Remington 700 action, but every component had been carefully selected and modified for maximum accuracy. The barrel was a heavy-profile stainless steel match grade. The stock was a precision-adjustable composite design, and the scope was a high-end variable power optic that cost more than most people's cars. But what struck Colonel Mitchell wasn't the quality of the equipment. He'd seen plenty of expensive civilian rifles. It was the methodical way Sarah handled each component. Her movements were economical and purposeful, displaying the kind of muscle memory that only came from thousands of hours of repetition. Impressive rifle, Rodriguez commented, his expert eye cataloging the custom modifications. What's the build spec? Sarah looked up from her assembly process. 26-inch barrel, 1 in 10 twist, chambered in 308 Winchester. The action has been blueprint and the trigger tuned to 2 pounds. Overall weight is 13 pounds, 4 ounces with the scope and bipod. Mitchell nodded approvingly. The specifications were professional grade, chosen for accuracy rather than flash. Many civilian shooters built rifles that looked impressive, but sacrificed functionality for appearance. Sarah's weapon was clearly built by someone who understood the relationship between equipment and performance. Range card, Rodriguez asked. Sarah pulled a waterproof notebook from her gear bag and handed it over. Rodriguez studied the detailed ballistic data, his eyebrows rising as he reviewed the information. The range card contained precise data for various distances, wind conditions, and environmental factors, all meticulously recorded and cross-referenced. You collected all this data yourself? Rodriguez asked. Every entry, Sarah confirmed. I never rely on manufacturer claims or computer predictions. Real-world performance is the only data that matters when you're trying to hit what you're aiming at. This impressed Mitchell more than the expensive equipment. Military snipers spent enormous amounts of time developing their own range cards because battlefield accuracy depended on knowing exactly how their specific rifle and ammunition combination performed under various conditions. The fact that a civilian had undertaken this level of preparation suggested a seriousness that went far beyond hobby shooting. What's your intended target distance for this demonstration? Mitchell asked. Sarah pointed to a series of targets set at various ranges across the training area. I'd like to work through a progression, starting at 600 meters and extending to 1,200 meters. But first, I want to show you something at 300 meters that might interest you. Mitchell frowned. 300 meters was a relatively short range for sniper training. Most of his students could hit targets consistently at that distance within their first week of training. Miss Chun, 300 meters is basic marksmanship for our students. I'm not sure what you could demonstrate at that range that would be relevant to our program. Trust me, Colonel. This isn't about the distance. It's about precision. Sarah finished assembling her rifle and attached a bipod to the front sling swivel. Then, she did something unexpected. She pulled out a smartphone and opened what appeared to be a weather application. Current conditions, she announced, reading from the phone. Temperature, 74 degrees. Humidity, 62%. Barometric pressure, 30.05 inches. Wind is variable, mostly from the southwest at 8 to 12 miles per hour with gusts to 15. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Mitchell. Military snipers used sophisticated weather monitoring equipment, but Sarah was gathering environmental data with consumer electronics. The phone app pulls data from local weather stations, Sarah explained, noticing their looks. It's not perfect, but it provides a baseline that I can adjust based on field observations. She pocketed the phone and moved to the shooting position, dropping into a prone position behind her rifle with fluid grace. Mitchell had watched thousands of shooters assume firing positions, and Sarah's technique was immediately recognizable as exceptional. Her body alignment was textbook perfect, her position was stable without being rigid, and her rifle handling displayed the kind of natural coordination that couldn't be taught. Target is 300 meters, Rodriguez called out, focusing his spotting scope on the designated target. Standard military silhouette, 10 rings scoring. Sarah settled behind her scope and began her shooting routine. Mitchell watched her breathing pattern, the subtle adjustments she made to her position, and the methodical way she worked through her pre-shot checklist. Everything about her approach suggested extensive training and experience. Send it when ready, Rodriguez announced. Sarah's first shot broke cleanly, the sound of the rifle sharp in the afternoon air. Through his binoculars, Mitchell saw the impact in the center of the target. Dead center, Rodriguez reported. Perfect 10 ring. Again, Mitchell said. One accurate shot proved nothing. Consistency was what separated good shooters from great ones. Sarah's second shot impacted less than an inch from her first. Her third shot was equally precise, creating a tight triangular group that would have been impressive even on a match rifle rest. Okay, Mitchell said grudgingly. Your basic marksmanship is solid, but 3 shots at 300 meters isn't— I'm not finished, Colonel, Sarah interrupted politely. Rodriguez, could you put up a fresh target? And this time, I'd like you to mark specific aiming points. Rodriguez looked to Mitchell, who nodded his approval. A new target was posted at 300 meters, this one marked with 5 small dots arranged in a cross pattern. Each dot was approximately 2 inches in diameter, small enough to require genuine precision. I'm going to engage each aiming point in sequence, Sarah announced. 5 shots, 5 different points of aim, demonstrating precision shooting rather than group shooting. This was different. Group shooting tested a rifle's accuracy and a shooter's consistency, but precision shooting tested the ability to hit exactly where you aimed every time. It was a more demanding skill that required absolute mastery of both equipment and technique. Sarah's 4th shot hit the top dot dead center. Her 5th shot took out the right dot with equal precision. The left dot, bottom dot, and center dot followed in rapid succession, each shot placed exactly where she'd aimed. 5 shots, 5 hits, 5 different points of aim, Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying new respect. Each impact within a quarter inch of center. Mitchell stared at the target through his binoculars. What Sarah had just demonstrated wasn't merely good shooting. It was exceptional shooting that would have impressed him coming from his most experienced instructors. How many rounds did you fire to develop that level of precision? He asked. Sarah began packing up her equipment for the move to longer ranges. I've been shooting this rifle for 3 years, Colonel. I estimate I've fired approximately 15,000 rounds through it in that time. 15,000 rounds represented serious commitment. Military snipers typically fired between 3,000 and 5,000 rounds during their entire training program, though they continue to train throughout their careers. For a civilian to have invested that much time and ammunition in developing her skills suggested a level of dedication that Mitchell was just beginning to appreciate. The 600-meter range is next, Sarah announced, slinging her rifle and picking up her gear bag. This is where things get interesting. As they moved to the longer-range shooting position, Mitchell found himself reassessing his initial skepticism. Sarah Chun was clearly not a typical civilian shooter. Her equipment was professional grade, her technique was flawless, and her precision was genuinely impressive. But the real test would come at longer ranges where environmental factors became more significant and small errors in technique were magnified dramatically. The 600-meter range was set up with steel silhouette targets that provided immediate audible feedback when hit. Sarah settled into a new shooting position, this time taking longer to study the environmental conditions. Wind is more complex at this distance, she observed, pointing to several wind flags positioned along the range. The flags show surface wind, but I can see heat mirage indicating upper-level conditions that might be different. Mitchell followed her gaze and realized she was reading environmental signs that many of his students missed entirely. Heat mirage, the shimmer visible through rifle scopes on warm days, could provide valuable information about wind conditions at different elevations between shooter and target. Based on the mirage pattern, I'm reading a slight crosswind component that isn't showing on the flags, Sarah continued. Probably 3 to 4 miles per hour from the left at mid-range. Rodriguez checked his own spotting scope and confirmed Sarah's assessment. She's right, Colonel. The mirage indicates left to right wind that the flags aren't catching. Sarah made a slight adjustment to her scope and settled behind her rifle. Her first shot at 600 meters struck dead center, producing a clear ring of steel on steel. Her second shot was equally accurate, followed by 3 more shots that created a group measuring less than 4 inches, well within military sniper standards for that distance. Impressive, Mitchell admitted, but let's see how you handle some pressure. He turned to Rodriguez. Set up a timed engagement. 5 targets, 90 seconds, 600 meters. This was a standard military exercise that tested not just accuracy, but speed and decision-making under time pressure. The targets would be exposed for limited periods, requiring the shooter to acquire, aim, and engage multiple targets quickly while maintaining precision. Sarah nodded calmly when the exercise was explained. Understand the drill, Colonel. Signal when you're ready. The targets appeared randomly across the range, exposed for 15-second windows with 5-second intervals between exposures. Sarah smoothly tracked from target to target, her movements economical and precise. Each shot was carefully aimed despite the time pressure, and each target was hit cleanly before disappearing. 5 for 5, Rodriguez reported. Total time, 73 seconds. All hit center mass. Mitchell was beginning to realize that Sarah Chun represented something he'd rarely encountered in his career, a civilian shooter who possessed genuinely military-grade skills. But the real test would come at the extreme ranges where only the most elite snipers could perform consistently. 800 meters, he announced. This is where we separate the professionals from the amateurs. 800 meters was the distance where everything changed. Environmental factors that were minor considerations at shorter ranges became major variables. Wind drift became significant. Bullet drop required precise calculation, and small errors in technique or equipment resulted in complete misses. Sarah approached the 800-meter line with the same methodical preparation she displayed at shorter ranges, but Mitchell noticed she spent more time studying conditions and making calculations. She consulted her range card extensively, cross-referencing recorded data with current observations. Temperature is 3 degrees higher than when I collected my data for this range, she noted, making adjustments to her scope. That changes the density altitude and affects trajectory. I'm compensating with a half-minute of angle adjustment. This level of attention to detail impressed Mitchell. Many experienced military shooters would have ignored such a small temperature change, but Sarah understood that at extreme ranges, small variables could have significant effects. Her first shot at 800 meters impacted slightly high and right, a solid hit but not centered. Sarah studied the impact through her scope, analyzing the difference between her point of aim and point of impact. Wind drift was more than I calculated, she observed, and the trajectory data needs refinement for current conditions. She made subtle adjustments to her scope and fired again. The second shot was better, closer to center, but still not perfect. Her third shot was dead center, indicating that she'd successfully adapted to the specific conditions. She's learning the range in real time, Rodriguez observed. That's exactly what we teach our students to do. Mitchell nodded. The ability to analyze misses and make corrections was one of the most critical skills for a military sniper. Combat conditions rarely match training conditions perfectly, so the ability to adapt quickly was essential. 3 more shots, Mitchell ordered. Show me consistency at 800. Sarah's next 3 shots formed a tight group around the center of the target, demonstrating that her initial corrections had been accurate and that she could maintain that level of precision. Now we get to the interesting part, Mitchell announced. 1,000 meters. This is graduate-level shooting. 1,000 meters was where the wheat was separated from the chaff. At this distance, everything had to be perfect: position, breathing, trigger control, equipment, environmental reading, and mental focus. A tiny error at any stage would result in a complete miss. Sarah spent nearly 10 minutes preparing for her first shot at 1,000 meters. She consulted multiple data sources, made precise scope adjustments, and took time to study the complex wind patterns that affected such long-range shooting. This is serious business, she said quietly, settling behind her rifle. At this distance, there's no room for guessing. Her first shot at 1,000 meters missed the target entirely. Through his spotting scope, Rodriguez saw the impact in the dirt several feet to the right. Wind call was wrong, Sarah announced without emotion. The conditions are more complex than I initially read. She studied the impact point through her own scope, using the miss to gather information about the actual conditions between her position and the target. Then, she made a significant wind correction and fired again. The second shot hit the edge of the target. Still not perfect, but a dramatic improvement that demonstrated her ability to learn from mistakes and adapt quickly. Her third shot hit dead center. Now that, Rodriguez said with genuine admiration, is how you learn a range. Mitchell found himself impressed despite his reservations. What Sarah had just demonstrated was the kind of adaptive shooting that he spent weeks teaching to his military students. The fact that she could do it quickly and effectively suggested a level of natural ability that was genuinely rare. But Mitchell had one more test in mind, the test that would determine whether Sarah Chun was simply a gifted civilian shooter or something more extraordinary. 1,200 meters, he announced. This is the maximum effective range for most military sniper systems. At this distance, we're testing the absolute limits of equipment and human capability. 1,200 meters was a distance where physics became unforgiving. Bullet drop measured in feet rather than inches. Wind drift could throw a shot off target by yards, and the margin for error essentially disappeared. Most military snipers trained extensively before attempting shots at this range, and even then, success rates were significantly lower than at shorter distances. Sarah stared at the distant target through her scope, understanding that this was the moment that would define her entire demonstration. Everything she'd shown so far had been impressive, but 1,200 meters would test whether she truly belonged in the same conversation as elite military snipers. "I've never shot this distance with military ammunition," she admitted. "My data is all based on my own loads, which have different ballistic characteristics." Mitchell appreciated her honesty. "Then, show me how you adapt to an unknown situation." What Sarah did next would become legendary among those who witnessed it, and would fundamentally change Colonel Mitchell's understanding of what was possible when raw talent met perfect preparation. Sarah Chun approached the 1,200-meter firing line with the kind of focused intensity that Colonel Mitchell had only seen in his most elite students. But where military snipers often carried the weight of combat experience and institutional training, Sarah possessed something different. The pure, uncompromised confidence of someone who had spent years pursuing perfection for its own sake. She spent nearly 20 minutes studying the extreme range target, using her scope to trace the terrain between her position and the distant silhouette. At 1,200 meters, the target appeared impossibly small, reduced to a barely visible shape that wavered in the heat mirage rising from the valley floor. "The challenge isn't just the distance," Sarah explained to Rodriguez and Mitchell. "At this range, I'm dealing with multiple wind zones, significant bullet drop, and the fact that my projectile will be in flight for over a second and a half. During that time, conditions can change enough to throw off a perfectly aimed shot." Mitchell nodded grimly. This was exactly why 1,200-meter shots were considered the domain of only the most exceptional snipers. The number of variables that could affect bullet flight at that distance was staggering, and the precision required to account for all of them was beyond most human capabilities. Sarah consulted her range card one final time, then made a series of complex calculations on a small notepad. Her mathematics covered bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric conditions, and even the Coriolis effect, the influence of the Earth's rotation on long-range projectiles. Based on standard military ammunition ballistics and current conditions, I'm estimating 18 minutes of angle elevation and 6 minutes left wind, she announced. But I'm going to start conservative and adjust based on what I observe. These calculations impressed Mitchell. Most civilian shooters had never heard of concepts like Coriolis effect, let alone learn to calculate and compensate for them. Sarah was demonstrating theoretical knowledge that matched what he taught to advanced military students. She made her adjustments and settled behind her rifle, taking even more time than usual to ensure perfect position and breathing control. At 1,200 meters, tiny variations in technique that were inconsequential at shorter ranges could result in misses measured in feet rather than inches. Her first shot at the extreme distance was carefully aimed and smoothly executed. Through their spotting scopes, Mitchell and Rodriguez watched for the impact, knowing that at this range, even finding the bullet's point of impact could be challenging. "I see dust kick up about 4 feet low and 2 feet right," Rodriguez reported after several seconds of scanning. Sarah absorbed this information without emotion. The miss was significant, but it provided valuable data about the actual conditions between her position and the target. "Trajectory is dropping more than calculated, and wind drift is greater than estimated," she observed. "The military ammunition has different ballistic characteristics than my competition loads, and the atmospheric conditions are affecting flight path more than my initial calculation suggested." She made substantial corrections to her scope, adjusting both elevation and windage based on the observed impact of her first shot. This was classic military sniper methodology, using the first shot as a learning tool to refine subsequent shots. Her second shot at 1,200 meters impacted closer to the target, but still missed low. Sarah studied the impact point carefully, continuing to refine her understanding of how her rifle and ammunition performed at this extreme distance. Learning curve, she said simply, making another adjustment. Each shot gives me more data about actual conditions. Mitchell found himself impressed by her methodical approach. Many shooters became frustrated when dealing with misses at long range, but Sarah treated each shot as part of a systematic process of gathering information and refining her technique. Her third shot hit the bottom edge of the target. Not a perfect shot, but a solid hit in an extremely challenging distance. The impact produced a clear ring of steel that echoed across the range. Contact, Rodriguez confirmed. Edge of the silhouette, but a solid hit at 1,200 meters. Sarah wasn't satisfied with simply hitting the target. She made a fine adjustment to her scope and fired her fourth shot at the extreme range. This shot impacted higher on the target, closer to center mass. Better, she observed. One more adjustment should center it. Her fifth shot at 1,200 meters struck dead center, producing a perfect ring of steel that announced a bullseye hit at one of the longest ranges typically used for military sniper training. Dead center at 1,200, Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying genuine awe. That's exceptional shooting by any standard. Mitchell stared at the distant target, processing what he'd just witnessed. Sarah Chun had just accomplished something that many of his military students struggled to achieve after weeks of training. She'd learned an extreme range in real time, adapted to unfamiliar ammunition, and achieved precision that would have been noteworthy coming from an experienced military sniper. But Sarah wasn't finished. "Colonel," she said, beginning to pack up her gear, "I have one more demonstration, if you're interested." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "What kind of demonstration?" "Something that might be relevant to your training program. A technique for rapid long-range engagement that I developed for competitive shooting." "Rapid long-range engagement?" Rodriguez echoed. "That's usually considered a contradiction in terms." Sarah smiled for the first time since beginning her demonstration. "That's what everyone thinks. But I've developed a method for maintaining precision while significantly reducing engagement time." This caught Mitchell's attention immediately. One of the constant challenges in military sniper training was balancing speed with accuracy. Combat situations often required quick shots at long distances, but traditional long-range shooting techniques prioritize precision over speed. "Show me," Mitchell said. Sarah sat up at the 800-meter line, explaining her technique as she prepared. Traditional long-range shooting involves extensive preparation for each shot, studying conditions, making calculations, adjusting equipment. But in competition, and presumably in combat, time is often a critical factor. She demonstrated her rapid engagement technique, which involved pre-calculating multiple scenarios and developing muscle memory for quick adjustments. Instead of taking minutes to prepare each shot, she was able to engage targets at 800 meters within 30 seconds while maintaining near-perfect accuracy. "The key is preparation and pattern recognition," she explained. "If you've studied conditions thoroughly and developed reliable techniques for quick environmental assessment, you can maintain most of your precision while dramatically reducing engagement time." Mitchell watched in amazement as Sarah engaged 5 different targets at 800 meters, hitting all 5 within 3 minutes, a time frame that would normally allow for maybe 2 carefully aimed shots. "This technique," he said slowly, "could revolutionize combat engagement procedures. It's based on competitive shooting sports where speed is often as important as accuracy," Sarah replied. "I thought it might translate to military applications." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah continued to demonstrate techniques and insights that challenge conventional military training wisdom. Her approach to wind reading was more sophisticated than standard military methods. Her equipment modifications offered advantages that could be incorporated into military systems. Her mathematical calculations for extreme-range shooting were more precise than standard military formulas. But what impressed Mitchell most was her teaching ability. As she demonstrated each technique, she clearly explained the theory behind it, the practical applications, and how it could be adapted for military use. She possessed not just exceptional shooting skills, but the rare ability to articulate and transfer those skills to others. Miss Chun, Mitchell said as the demonstration concluded, I need to ask you a direct question. Have you ever considered military service? Sarah paused in packing her equipment. I've thought about it, Colonel, but I assumed that my age and lack of military experience would disqualify me from sniper programs. Age isn't necessarily a disqualifier, Rodriguez interjected. We've had successful students who enlisted at 19, and your lack of military experience might actually be an advantage. No bad habits to unlearn. Mitchell found himself facing an unexpected decision. Military protocol dictated specific procedures for recruiting and training snipers, but Sarah Chun represented something unprecedented. Her demonstrated abilities exceeded those of many experienced military shooters, and her innovative techniques could potentially improve the entire training program. Would you be interested in participating in our program as a student? Mitchell asked carefully. Sarah stopped packing and looked at him directly. Are you offering me a position in military sniper training? I'm suggesting that we might be able to find a way to make that happen, if you're interested. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Sarah seemed genuinely surprised. Yes, Colonel, I would be very interested. But how would that work? I'm not military personnel. There are programs for exceptional civilians, Rodriguez explained. Direct enlistment with advanced placement, civilian contractor positions, even research and development roles. If someone wanted to pursue it, there are ways to make it happen. Mitchell was already thinking through the possibilities. Sarah's demonstrated abilities warranted serious consideration, but her potential contributions to the program might be even more valuable. The techniques she demonstrated could improve training for all students, and her analytical approach to shooting could enhance the entire curriculum. Miss Chun, would you be willing to return tomorrow for a more extensive evaluation? I'd like to have you work with our current class of students, both to further assess your abilities and to see how your techniques might benefit their training. Sarah's eyes lit up. Absolutely, Colonel. What time should I be here? 0700 hours. Dress for field work and bring whatever equipment you think might be useful for instructional purposes. As Sarah finished packing and prepared to leave, Mitchell found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about sniper training. For 20 years, he'd worked within a system that selected candidates based on military experience, combat background, and proven performance in conventional military roles. Sarah Chun met none of these traditional criteria, yet her demonstrated abilities exceeded those of most candidates who did. Rodriguez, Mitchell said as Sarah's vehicle disappeared down the access road, I want you to research every regulation and program option that might allow us to bring her into the training program officially. Yes, sir. Do you really think she's good enough to train alongside Navy SEALs? Mitchell considered the question carefully. What he'd witnessed that afternoon had challenged his assumptions about talent, training, and the sources of exceptional ability. Rodriguez, I think she might be good enough to train Navy SEALs. That evening, Mitchell spent hours reviewing the documentation from Sarah's demonstration. The target photos, range cards, and timing data told a story that was almost difficult to believe. In a single afternoon, a 19-year-old civilian had demonstrated shooting abilities that rivaled those of the military's most elite snipers. But beyond her individual performance, Sarah had presented new techniques and approaches that could potentially improve the entire sniper training program. Her mathematical methods for calculating long-range shots were more precise than standard military procedures. Her equipment modifications offered advantages that could be incorporated into military systems. Her teaching techniques could enhance the way the program developed new snipers. Mitchell made a decision that night that would ultimately change his career, his training program, and the young woman who had walked on his range with nothing but confidence and a rifle case. He was going to recommend Sarah Chun for immediate integration into the most elite sniper training program in the United States military. But first, he needed to see how she performed under the ultimate test, training alongside the Navy SEALs who were currently enrolled in his program. If she could hold her own with elite military operators, then everything was possible. If she couldn't, then her impressive demonstration would remain nothing more than an interesting afternoon on the range. The next morning would determine whether Sarah Chun was simply an exceptional civilian shooter or the beginning of a revolution in how America trained its military snipers. Mitchell suspected he already knew the answer, but he learned over his career that assumptions were dangerous, especially when dealing with human potential. What happened when Sarah returned the following morning would exceed even his optimistic expectations and would begin a series of events that would ultimately rewrite every record in military sniper training history. The morning air carried a different energy as Sarah Chun arrived at the Quantico training facility for her second day. Word of her demonstration had spread among the training staff, and she could feel the weight of curious eyes tracking her movement from the parking area to the main building. At 0700 hours sharp, she presented herself to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who escorted her to Colonel Mitchell's office. Miss Chun, Mitchell began without preamble. Yesterday, you impressed us with your individual shooting abilities. Today, we're going to test whether those abilities translate to real training scenarios with military personnel. Sarah nodded, understanding that yesterday had been merely an audition. Today would determine whether she truly belonged among elite military operators. You'll be integrated with our current class of 18 students, Mitchell continued. 12 Navy SEALs, 3 Marines, 2 Army Rangers, and 1 Air Force Special Operations. These are experienced combat veterans who've already completed basic sniper training and are here for advanced instruction. The weight of this information settled on Sarah's shoulders. She would be working alongside men who had served multiple combat deployments, who had proven themselves in actual warfare, and who represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. Her civilian status and age would make her an obvious outsider. What will my role be? She asked. Initially, you'll participate as a student, Rodriguez explained. We want to see how you perform in structured military training environments. But Colonel Mitchell also wants you to share some of the techniques you demonstrated yesterday with the other students. This presented an interesting challenge. Sarah would need to prove she could learn and adapt to military methods while simultaneously offering insights that might improve those methods. It was a delicate balance that would require both humility and confidence. The students don't know about yesterday's demonstration, Mitchell added. As far as they're concerned, you're a new trainee with an unusual background. How they react to you will depend entirely on your performance. Sarah appreciated this approach. She would earn respect through demonstrated ability rather than reputation, which was exactly how military culture operated. 20 minutes later, she found herself standing before 18 of America's most elite warriors, feeling remarkably small and young. The students were arranged in a semicircle around Colonel Mitchell, their attention focused completely on their instructor's words. Gentlemen, we have a new trainee joining us today, Mitchell announced. Chun will be participating in all exercises and evaluations. I expect you to extend the same professional courtesy you would to any fellow student. The introduction was deliberately minimal, revealing nothing about Sarah's background or the circumstances that had brought her to the program. Several students glanced at her with mild curiosity, but most remained focused on Mitchell's briefing about the day's training schedule. Today's exercise is unknown distance engagement, Mitchell continued. You'll work in pairs with 1 shooter and 1 spotter. Targets are positioned at various ranges between 400 and 1,000 meters, but you won't be told the distances. You'll need to use your ranging techniques to determine distance, calculate holds, and engage successfully. This was a classic military sniper exercise that tested multiple skills simultaneously. Students needed to accurately estimate range, read environmental conditions, calculate ballistic solutions, and execute precise shots, all while working as part of a 2-person team. Chun, you'll be paired with Petty Officer Martinez, Rodriguez announced. Petty Officer First Class Antonio Martinez was a Navy SEAL with 15 years of military service and for combat deployments. His weathered face and steady demeanor immediately marked him as an experienced operator who had seen serious action. He approached Sarah with polite professionalism, but she could sense his skepticism about working with an unknown civilian. Ma'am, Martinez said with formal courtesy. Have you worked as part of a sniper team before? No, Sarah replied honestly. I've only done solo shooting. I'll need you to guide me through the team procedures. Martinez nodded approvingly at her directness. Roger that. In military sniper operations, the spotter is often more important than the shooter. I'll handle range estimation and environmental assessment. Your job is to follow my instructions and make the shots I call. This arrangement suited Sarah perfectly. She would be able to observe military methods while contributing her shooting abilities without overstepping her knowledge boundaries. The first target was positioned across a valley at an unknown distance. Martinez settled behind his spotting scope and began the systematic process of range estimation that military snipers used in the field. I'm reading 850 meters using the mil-dot reticle, he announced quietly. Wind is light and variable, mostly left to right at about 5 miles per hour. Temperature is steady, humidity moderate. Sarah listened carefully as Martinez walked through his calculations, noting the methodical approach that military training instilled. His techniques were different from her civilian competition methods, but equally systematic and thorough. Based on range and conditions, I'm calling for a 6 o'clock hold with 2 minutes left wind, Martinez concluded. Take your time, get a good position, and send it when you're ready. Sarah settled behind her rifle and acquired the distant target through her scope. Martinez's range estimation seemed accurate based on her own assessment, and his wind call matched what she observed from environmental indicators. Her first shot struck the center of the target, producing a clear hit that Martinez confirmed through his spotting scope. Dead center, he reported. Outstanding shot. They moved to the second target, positioned at a different range and angle. Martinez repeated his systematic assessment process, providing Sarah with precise firing instructions based on his calculations. Her second shot was equally accurate, and Martinez's professional demeanor began to show hints of genuine respect. "Ma'am, what did you train?" he asked as they prepared for the third target. "Civilian competition shooting," Sarah replied. "This is my first exposure to military sniper techniques." Martinez paused in his spotting scope setup and looked at her directly. "You're telling me you've never had military training, but you're shooting like a graduate-level sniper?" "I've been shooting competitively since I was 12, Sarah explained. Different environment, but similar precision requirements. The third target was positioned at extreme range, barely visible through their optics. Martinez spent several minutes studying the target and environmental conditions before making his assessment. "This one's challenging," he admitted. "I'm estimating 1,100 meters, which is at the edge of our effective range. Wind is complex due to the terrain, and I'm seeing heat mirage that indicates atmospheric disturbance." Sarah observed Martinez's process with growing admiration for military training methods. His systematic approach accounted for variables that civilian shooting didn't typically consider, and his teamwork protocols ensured that decisions were double-checked and verified. "I'm calling for a 12 o'clock hold with 4 minutes left wind," Martinez announced. "This is a tough shot, so don't worry if we need to adjust after the first round." Sarah's shot at 1,100 meters struck the target cleanly, earning an impressed whistle from Martinez. "Damn," he said quietly. "That was a hell of a shot." By the end of the morning exercise, word had spread among the other students that the new civilian trainee was shooting at a level that matched or exceeded most of their own capabilities. During the lunch break, several students approached Sarah with questions about her background and experience. "I heard you put 5 shots in a 2-inch group at 800 meters, commented Staff Sergeant Johnson, one of the Marine students. "Is that accurate?" "The shots were accurate," Sarah replied carefully. "I can't take credit for the conditions being favorable." This humble response earned approving nods from the military students. Excessive confidence or boastfulness would have immediately alienated her from the group, but acknowledging the role of favorable conditions demonstrated the kind of realistic self-assessment that military culture valued. The afternoon exercise was more challenging, a stalking and concealment drill that tested students' abilities to move undetected through terrain and engage targets without being spotted by instructors acting as enemy observers. This was completely outside Sarah's experience. Competitive shooting took place on clearly defined ranges with obvious firing positions, while military stalking required fieldcraft skills that she'd never developed. "Ma'am," Martinez said as they studied the terrain, This exercise is about more than shooting. We need to move through that area without being detected, identify our assigned target, and take a shot from a concealed position. Sarah studied the rolling hills and scattered vegetation that comprised their area of operations. The challenge was obvious: how to move several hundred yards through open terrain while remaining invisible to trained military observers. "I'm going to follow your lead completely," she told Martinez. "This is your area of expertise." Martinez outlined his movement plan, explaining the route he intended to take and the concealment techniques they would use. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that this aspect of sniper training was as important as marksmanship, perhaps more so. The stalk took 3 hours. Martinez led them through a careful approach that utilized every piece of available cover, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid detection. Sarah followed his instructions precisely, learning military fieldcraft through direct application. When they finally reached their firing position, a concealed spot with a clear view of their assigned target at 600 meters, Sarah was amazed by how effectively they had remained hidden from the observing instructors. "Target acquired," Martinez whispered, identifying their objective through his spotting scope. "Range is 600 meters. Wind is negligible. Clear shot." Sarah carefully positioned her rifle, using the natural concealment Martinez had selected to hide their location from enemy observation. The shot itself was technically straightforward, well within her capabilities at a distance she'd mastered, but the context was entirely different from anything she'd experienced. Her shot hit the target cleanly, completing the exercise successfully. But more importantly, she had learned that military sniping involved far more than just accurate shooting. As they made their way back to the rally point, Martinez offered his assessment of her performance. "Ma'am, your shooting is outstanding, better than most of the instructors here. But you got a lot to learn about the other aspects of military sniping." Sarah nodded gratefully. "I can see that. The fieldcraft and tactical elements are completely new to me." "Good attitude," Martinez replied. "Most civilian shooters think marksmanship is all there is to sniping. You understand there's more to learn." That evening, Colonel Mitchell called Sarah into his office for a debrief of her first day training with military students. "How did it go from your perspective?" he asked. Sarah considered her response carefully. The shooting aspects felt familiar, but everything else was a learning experience. The teamwork protocols, the fieldcraft, the tactical considerations, that's all new territory for me. "And how did the other students react to you?" "Professionally," Sarah replied. "They judged me based on performance rather than background, which is exactly what I hoped would happen." Mitchell nodded approvingly. The instructor's reports confirmed that assessment. "Your marksmanship impressed everyone, but more importantly, you demonstrated the right attitude for learning military procedures." He leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Miss Chun, based on today's performance, I'm prepared to offer you something unprecedented." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, sensing that this conversation would determine her future. "What kind of offer, Colonel?" "Official enrollment in our advanced sniper training program," Mitchell said. "It would require enlisting in the military, but we can arrange for direct placement at an advanced level based on your demonstrated abilities." The magnitude of this offer struck Sarah immediately. Military sniper training was among the most exclusive and demanding programs in the armed forces. The opportunity to join such a program was typically available only to experienced military personnel who had proven themselves through years of service. "Colonel, I'm honored by the offer," Sarah said carefully, "but I want to make sure I understand what this would involve." "Complete integration with military training standards," Mitchell explained. "You'd be held to the same standards as every other student, with no special consideration for your civilian background. The program is physically and mentally demanding, with a high attrition rate even among experienced military personnel." Sarah considered this soberly. What Mitchell was offering represented a complete change in her life direction, from civilian competition shooting to military service with all the obligations and commitments that implied. "How long would I have to decide?" she asked. "Take the weekend to think about it," Mitchell replied. "But I'll need an answer Monday morning. If you're interested, we'll need to begin the enlistment process immediately to have you officially enrolled in the next training cycle." As Sarah drove home that evening, she found herself facing the most significant decision of her young life. Everything she'd worked toward in civilian shooting had led to this moment, but accepting Mitchell's offer would mean leaving behind everything familiar and embracing a future that she couldn't fully predict. What she didn't know was that her decision would ultimately lead to achievements that would rewrite military sniper training records and establish new standards for what was possible when exceptional talent met world-class training. The weekend ahead would determine whether Sarah Chun remained a gifted civilian shooter or became something entirely different, a legend whose influence on military sniper training would last for decades. Sarah Chun spent the weekend walking through her family's neighborhood in California, wrestling with a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her life. The familiar suburban streets where she'd grown up suddenly felt different, as if she was seeing them through the eyes of someone preparing to leave everything behind. Her parents had listened to her explanation of Colonel Mitchell's offer with a mixture of pride and concern. Her father, an engineer who understood precision and dedication, recognized the magnitude of the opportunity. Her mother worried about the dangers inherent in military service, especially in specialized roles that might lead to combat deployments. "This isn't just about joining the military," her mother had said. "You'll be training for one of the most dangerous jobs in the armed forces." Sarah understood her parents' concerns, but she also understood that Colonel Mitchell was offering her something that might never come again: the chance to pursue excellence at the highest possible level, surrounded by the most elite training and the most dedicated people in their field. By Sunday evening, she had made her decision. Monday morning at 0700 hours, Sarah presented herself at Colonel Mitchell's office with her answer. "I accept your offer, Colonel. I want to join the program." Mitchell smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him since their initial meeting. "Outstanding. Master Sergeant Rodriguez has already initiated the paperwork for direct enlistment with advanced placement. You'll need to complete some administrative requirements, but we can have you officially enrolled within 2 weeks." The next months became a blur of intensive training that pushed Sarah beyond anything she'd experienced in civilian shooting. Military sniper training encompassed far more than marksmanship, including advanced mathematics, meteorology, field medicine, communications, land navigation, and tactical procedures that civilian shooters never encountered. The physical demands were equally challenging. Military snipers needed to carry heavy equipment over long distances, maintain accuracy while fatigued, and operate effectively under extreme stress. Sarah's civilian background hadn't prepared her for the physical rigors of military training, and she struggled initially to meet the demanding fitness standards. But her marksmanship abilities continued to impress everyone in the program. Within her first month of formal training, she had matched or exceeded every existing accuracy record for her class. Her precision at extreme ranges was consistently superior to other students, and her ability to adapt to changing conditions was remarkable even by military standards. More importantly, she was improving rapidly in the non-shooting aspects of sniper training. Her intelligence and dedication allowed her to master field craft techniques, tactical procedures, and team coordination methods with exceptional speed. The combination of her natural shooting ability and her rapid mastery of military skills created something unprecedented in sniper training history. 3 months into her training, Sarah achieved something that had never been done before in the history of the Quantico sniper program. During a comprehensive evaluation that tested all aspects of sniper training, Sarah scored perfectly in every category. Her marksmanship was flawless across all ranges and conditions. Her field craft allowed her to remain undetected during the most challenging stalking exercises. Her knowledge of ballistics, meteorology, and tactical procedures exceeded the standards for graduation. "I've never seen anything like it," Rodriguez told Mitchell after reviewing Sarah's evaluation scores. "She's not just meeting our standards, she's redefining them." But the real breakthrough came during an advanced exercise that tested students' abilities under extreme stress and challenging conditions. The exercise simulated a combat scenario where snipers needed to engage multiple targets at various ranges while dealing with time pressure, environmental challenges, and simulated enemy fire. It was designed to identify students who could maintain their skills under the kind of pressure they would face in actual combat operations. Sarah's performance during this exercise became legendary among training staff and students alike. Working with Martinez as her spotter, the same Navy SEAL she'd been paired with during her first day, Sarah engaged 12 targets positioned between 300 and 1,300 meters. All 12 shots were hits, with 10 of them scoring direct center hits despite the challenging conditions and time constraints. But the 1,300-meter shot was what made history. The target was positioned at the absolute maximum range for the rifle system they were using in challenging wind conditions, with time pressure that forced rapid calculations and immediate execution. Most students would have attempted the shot and hoped for the best. Sarah approached it with the same methodical precision she brought to every challenge. Range 1,300 meters, Martinez called through his spotting scope. Wind is variable, 8 to 15 miles per hour from the northwest. Mirage indicates thermal disturbance at mid-range. This is a very difficult shot. Sarah made her calculations, accounting for the extreme range, complex wind conditions, and atmospheric factors that affected bullet flight at such distances. She adjusted her scope methodically, taking time to ensure every setting was precisely correct. Her shot broke cleanly, the sound sharp in the morning air. Through their optics, Sarah and Martinez watched the bullet's flight path across the valley, tracking its arc toward the distant target. The impact was perfect, dead center at 1,300 meters under challenging conditions with time pressure. Perfect hit, Martinez announced, his voice carrying awe. That's the longest confirmed hit in training program history. Word of Sarah's record-breaking shot spread quickly through the training facility. 1,300 meters exceeded the previous longest confirmed training shot by nearly 200 meters, and it had been achieved under conditions that made the accomplishment even more remarkable. Colonel Mitchell personally verified the shot, measuring the distance with precision equipment and confirming the environmental conditions. When the verification was complete, he made an announcement to the assembled training staff and students. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed a new program record. Private Chun has achieved a confirmed precision hit at 1,327 meters under field training conditions. This represents the longest confirmed training shot in the history of this facility. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. Military personnel rarely displayed emotion publicly, but Sarah's achievement had impressed even the most experienced instructors and operators. But Mitchell wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, Private Chin's overall performance in this program has been unprecedented. Her marksmanship scores, field craft evaluations, and tactical assessments exceed our highest standards in every category. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Based on her demonstrated abilities and consistent performance, I am recommending Private Chin for immediate advancement to instructor status upon completion of her current training cycle. This announcement created a stir among the assembled personnel. Advancement to instructor status typically required years of experience and proven performance in actual operations. The idea that someone could achieve instructor qualification directly from student status was unprecedented. Rodriguez stepped forward with additional documentation. Private Chun has also established new program records in precision shooting at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. Her scores in field craft and tactical procedures rank in the top 1% of all students who have completed this program. Over the following weeks, news of Sarah's achievements spread throughout the military sniper community. Training facilities at other bases requested information about her techniques and training methods. Senior officers arrived at Quantico to observe her performance and assess whether her innovations could be incorporated into standard training protocols. Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of being a student who was simultaneously helping to redesign the program she was completing. Her insights into precision shooting, her mathematical approaches to ballistic calculations, and her innovative equipment modifications were studied and adopted as improvements to the standard curriculum. But perhaps the most significant impact of Sarah's presence in the program was the way she challenged assumptions about who could excel as a military sniper. Her success forced military leadership to reconsider their recruitment and selection criteria, opening pathways for candidates who might have been overlooked under traditional systems. 6 months after walking onto the Quantico Range as a curious civilian, Sarah Chun graduated from advanced sniper training with the highest scores in program history. She had not only met every standard, she had established new standards that would challenge future students for years to come. At her graduation ceremony, Colonel Mitchell delivered remarks that would be quoted in military training circles for decades afterward. Private Chun represents something extraordinary: the convergence of natural talent, dedicated preparation, and the willingness to pursue excellence without compromise. Her achievements in this program have not only set new records, but have expanded our understanding of what is possible when exceptional ability meets world-class training. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. But more importantly, Private Chun has demonstrated that excellence can come from unexpected sources, and that our job as military trainers is not just to work within existing systems, but to remain open to revolutionary improvements from wherever they might originate. Sarah's response to these accolades was characteristically humble. Colonel Mitchell took a chance on someone who didn't fit the traditional profile for military sniper training, she said during her graduation remarks. The success belongs not just to me, but to an institution that was willing to look beyond conventional criteria and evaluate people based on demonstrated ability rather than background assumptions. Following her graduation, Sarah was assigned to a specialized unit that conducted advanced training and technique development for military snipers across all service branches. Her role involved teaching the innovations she had developed, continuing to push the boundaries of precision shooting, and identifying other candidates who might possess exceptional potential regardless of their conventional qualifications. The impact of Sarah Chin's 6 months at Quantico extended far beyond the record she had established. Her success had proven that exceptional talent could emerge from unexpected sources, that traditional selection criteria might overlook remarkable candidates, and that the pursuit of excellence required constant willingness to challenge existing assumptions. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of sniper training in the early 21st century, they would identify Sarah Chin's arrival at Quantico as a pivotal moment that fundamentally changed how America developed its most elite marksmen. The young woman who had talked her way onto a military base with nothing but confidence and a rifle case had become more than just an exceptional sniper. She had become living proof that true excellence recognizes no boundaries, respects no conventions, and can emerge wherever dedication meets opportunity. Colonel Mitchell, reflecting on his decision to give an unknown civilian chance to prove herself, would later say that Sarah Chun had taught him the most important lesson of his military career: never underestimate the power of someone who refuses to accept that something is impossible. The record Sarah established would eventually be broken by students trained using the techniques she had developed. But her real legacy was not in the numbers recorded in military databases. It was in the fundamental change she had brought to how America identified, trained, and developed the warriors who would protect the nation's interests in an uncertain world. The colonel who had initially brushed off a young woman's request to try the firing range had learned that sometimes the most revolutionary moments in history begin with having the wisdom to say yes to someone everyone else would have dismissed. In Sarah Chin's case, that wisdom had rewritten the book on what was possible when human potential met unlimited opportunity.